It's time that we go back to the beginning and learn the basics. Welcome to my course on HTML. Hey, how's it going guys? My name's Daniel, aka HashLips, and welcome to my channel where I teach you how to code. I'm excited for this HTML course, so let's jump right in. To follow along with my course, you will need an IDE. Now, an IDE is simply a text editor that helps us out with writing code. You can choose any IDE that you like. I recommend Visual Studio Code, and you can download it for any of your platforms down here. Go ahead and do that so that you have it on your system and we can get started. Before we leave this page, I would like to show you something interesting that you can try out in any browser. I'm using Chrome, so if you right click and click on Inspect, you will see the actual HTML structure of the website. Now we are going to dive more into the developer tools when we work with CSS, but this is valid to show because you need to understand that HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it simply means it provides a structure of the website. So HTML simply lays out the structure of the page. We can see that we have a bunch of divs, a footer tag, and these are all called elements, which we'll get into this course. But just know that each and every browser that you see today has to display HTML in some way, because that's the browser standard for recognizing how a page should look like. So even if you use frameworks such as React, Angular, it all compiles down to HTML at the end of the day so that it can display on the front. When I talk about the front, I'm talking about the client-side application, the site that the client sees, which is usually the browser. And when we talk about front-end, that's generally what it means. We are developers for the front-end user. And generally, the front-end code compiles down to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I'm going to be teaching you the HTML hypertext markup language of the browsers, and that's all you need to start your journey as a front-end developer. I'm very excited, and I wish someone taught me this when I started learning HTML the way I'm going to be teaching you guys. After installing Visual Studio Code, go ahead and open it up. Then we can go and say open a new folder and create a folder anywhere on your system where you want to keep this tutorial content. I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder and call it tutorial. And maybe I'll just call it tutorials because I'll be doing the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in this folder. Now that I have created a new file or folder structure, we're going to go ahead and open it. You'll see that Visual Studio Code goes ahead and opens this folder. Now it's empty at the moment and we need to kick it off. So the first thing you can do is right click here on the empty space after making sure you are in the right folder and create a new file. We are going to be creating an index.html file. Whenever you add a .html extension to a file, the browser gets ready to render that HTML. Now there's another thing that you can specify for the browser to know that it's definitely HTML. You can begin the beginning tag like this. Now it has two sharp brackets. I'm going to refer to these as sharp brackets, not great or equal signs. But anyway, the sharp brackets, and then in the middle, you put an exclamation mark, doc type, and then HTML. This is on the top of the page because this will tell the browser that you do have HTML format in here that it needs to display. You can go ahead and save this by pressing Command S. Now, while we have this, the index.html file is a special file. If the browser sees an index.html in your kind of hosted server, it will try and render that one first because it says index. But you can have multiple different HTML files and they don't all need to be called index, and they can be referred differently pointing to different pages. That's just something to note. We will also need a cool extension that we can get on Visual Studio Code. I'll explain this quickly. The reason for this is because if we change the code, we want it to dynamically update every time we hit save. What you can do usually with an HTML file, and here it is in our tutorials folder, is double click on it and it will open it up and here you can see this is the file location. This is great for static HTML files, but not when it comes to adding JavaScript and CSS and you want to do dynamic changes. For that, we can go to Visual Studio Code, go to the Extensions panel, and install Live Server. I'm going to enable mine, so just make sure it's enabled, and you can go ahead and search for it here in the search bar. Once you have Live Server installed, you will see that if you now go back, you can right-click on the HTML file and say Open with Live Server. This will actually start up a server and host it from a port. We can now see that this is hosted by the Live Server on port 5500. I will get into URIs and how they work and servers on a later stage, but just know for now that hosting it off a file system like this is not good for dynamic content, as well as the Live Server helps facilitate us by saving the changes and updating this live. So we get to code, make changes, and then it will appear here in real time. For now, think of a server as just a folder serving files. Here you can see at this quote-unquote folder, we are serving and showing the user the index.html file. And that's basically all it comes down to and is a very basic description of a server. So let's just go with that for now, and then we can now start our journey and type out some HTML. Let's start typing HTML. So like I said, it's important to write your doc type at the top. Following that, the structure of a HTML page stays the same always. You will always have an opening element, which is the HTML element, and then a closing element. Now, what do I mean when I say opening and closing elements? Well, an opening element looks like this. It gives the two sharp brackets, the greater or equal sign brackets, and then inside defines that element's name. In this case, I'm defining an HTML element that's wrapping my whole HTML page. What do I mean by wrapping? Well, anything that goes in between these elements is kind of considered a part of this page now. Then we get a closing element. That is defined by putting a / in front of your element's name. This is important and true for most elements in HTML, apart from a few exceptions where you have a shorthand syntax for that. You will understand this way better as we go along. Let's focus on the structure like I said. So we need our doc type, our HTML tags, and then we need two very important tags as well. We need a head, which is now going to have an opening and a closing tag like so. Then we also need another element, which is the body. So think of this as a head and a body of a person. We get the head, and it always has to have the body. Now, this is just semantically meaningful because in the header we put links and all sorts of important things about this page, and then the body contains the actual content. I like to think of it as the head containing all the important information such as the links, and it's the whole brains of the show. Whereas the body contains our structure and how we look. That being said, you can see that we have an opening and a closing tag for each of these elements. There are a lot of elements in HTML, and we will get to explore some of them. There's actually a huge list, and I'll also give you some resources later on so you can explore all the ones that we won't cover in this course. But I will show you the basic ones that everyone uses. The structure of HTML is very important as well. Not so much for the browser, because if we structured it like this, the browser would read it, but it's not readable to the human eye. That's why we indent all the elements that wrap other elements. So you can see that these elements are wrapped by the HTML, and that's why they are on the same indentation level. So just keep that as a rule that you can follow. Always indent if something is wrapping it. Now, let's take a look at the title element. This is an element provided by the HTML language for us to specify the title of a page. Let's call this page hello and save it. you will see that my body tag just closed off on itself, and that's because I'm using a plugin called Prettier. You can also install that by going to your extensions and installing Prettier over there. So you'll sometimes see my code reformat itself, but usually I like to keep it like this. But every time I save, it's going to do that. So just so that you know. Anyways, when we go back to the browser, we will be able to refresh this, and you cannot see this now, but at the very top of the tab, you can see that this says hello. And there you can see if I hover over it, there is my title hello. And that has to do with something in the head. It's the information about the page. Hello is not really a descriptive name, so I'm going to call this the tutorials page, like so. That's maybe a bit more of a descriptive name. Anyway, that's only to do with the header. Now that we have something in the header which you don't always need, I'm going to go and define something in the body. Another element that we can use is called the p tag. So opening and closing elements for our p tag, and here we can say this is the body. Now that we have this, I'm going to save the file, go back to Chrome, and you can see that here is our paragraph tag. Let's go ahead and put a few more paragraphs so you can see. I'm going to save the page, go back, and there you can see there's our paragraph tags. Now, this is called the markup. We basically specifying that we want to show 3 paragraphs. You can see that it looks ugly because it just spaces everything right at the top and cascades everything right after each other, almost like Tetris. I'm going to need some content for my paragraphs, and usually what you use as a developer to basically just test things out, you can make use of the lorem ipsum text. Basically, this is just random text that you can use in your code. Now, I've copied a paragraph and I'm going to put it over there. Then I'm going to save it so that my formatter can format this for me correctly. I want to kind of split these up, so let's go ahead and split this here and put it there as well. Now I'm going to remove this last paragraph. Let's go back to our server and let's check it out. There you can see is the 2 paragraphs. So sometimes you might wonder when to use which element. Well, it's pretty straightforward. If this is a paragraph that you want to display, then use the paragraph tag or the element. If there's a heading, then what you can do is let's go above this paragraph tag and add a heading. Headings are displayed as H's. So everything from H1 to H6 gives a different heading style. It usually goes from the biggest to the smallest, where H1 would be very big. So if I do that, and if I put a H6 maybe just below here for the second article or the second paragraph, save it, and this one I can call small. If I save this and go back to what we have over here, refresh it, you can see that the title over here, the heading is quite big. It's an H1, and the small is an H6. Now it ranges all the way from H1 to H6, and you can use any size. You don't only have to use these sizes, you can change the sizes up with CSS, but this is how HTML barely, or like in its bare form, can give you a size to a text. The reasons why we want to use headings and paragraphs in the right format, like we would kind of do it when we write something down and specify something as a title and then the paragraph's body, is because search engines go through them and then look at what is an H1. If this article's heading is this, then that content might be relevant to Google search engines. That's why it's not a good idea, but totally possible, to just put a p tag over here and there, and then just style it with some CSS to make it bigger. But it's better convention to actually use the HTML semantic meanings of each element in the right place. I'm going to go ahead and make these all H2 tags. I'm going to keep this to the big, and let's just do, maybe we can just say title, and I'm going to do the title there as well. Keep them H2s. So we have a nice layout so far. Apart from headings and paragraph tags, something that you'll often see being used is the link attribute. Now, it sounds quite simple by just writing link, but it's not. What you need to put is a simple A. So we put the A tag, and it also has an opening and closing tag, and then we go ahead and type something in. So we'll say this is a link, like so. Then, where does this link to? So seeing that the link is supposed to take a user outside to another page or some other video, whatever it might be, we need to specify it somewhere. This comes and brings us to the next concept in HTML, which are attributes. Now, these elements, all of them, are able to accept extra attributes. Attributes are given to an element to either alter its state or basically add functionality to it. So for instance, with the A tag, we can add an attribute called href. Now, how you add attributes is right after the attribute's name, but still inside the bracket of the very first opening tag. The href attribute can take in a URL. So when we paste it in there and we click save, we can go back to our page. Now you can see that this is underlined, and if we click on it, this will take us to this page. So click, and there's the HashLips website. While we're here, if you are struggling with any code, please go and join our Discord group. Personally, I feel links are not really valuable if they take your attention away from the main page. So how can we make this link take a user to a new tab instead of just replacing the current browser? Well, we can add a new attribute. This attribute is the target attribute. We can specify underscore blank, and what this means is basically telling this browser that we want this link to go and open it in a new tab. Now when we click on the link, I actually get a brand new tab, and it's perfect because then I can switch back and forth between my link and the main page that I got the link from. Like I mentioned, many elements can take attributes. Let's take a look at how we can add an image into our page as well as use attributes with the image element. To add an image, you specify the keyword img, and in this case, this element does not have a closing tag per se. What I mean by that is you still need to specify the closing notation, but you specify it like this. This can be confusing in the very beginning, but there are a few elements that have this behavior. For instance, if I put a line break, basically put this and put BR standing for line break, and I put a few of them, you can see that they don't have opening tags. And it's simple because there's nothing that we really need to put in between those brackets. So if I go back to my website, I can see a bunch of line breaks over here, and there is technically an image, but it doesn't have a source yet, or a width and a height. So I've shown this quickly, but this is how line breaks are indicated. I'm going to take them out for now. We are focusing on this image tag. So to provide an image, what we can do is we can specify the src field, which stands for the source. Where is this image source going to come from? Now, when it comes to this, you can basically have a source to a local image next to your index.html page, or you can also have it online and make it pull from somewhere that's already on another server, which I'm going to do now to keep it simple. I am going to use this mask image that I found from my web page. This is a link, and we can actually incorporate this inside of our image and use it as the source. So now I'm going to go back to the code and paste it over here. Let's save and see what happens to our web page. Wow, there's the image, but it's very big, and we would like to resize this. There are many ways of styling HTML elements by using CSS, but now seeing that this is our HTML tutorial, we are going to make use of the attributes. I'm going to specify a width of 200 save this and go back to my page. We can now see that my image is 200 pixels wide. We did not have to specify a height at all because it keeps the aspect ratio. We can however specify a height. Let's make it 20. Maybe it will look a bit funny, but you can see it squashes. And that's why I only specified a width. So I'm going to get rid of that. And that's how you can easily add extra attributes to the image tag in pure HTML. A good practice when it comes to images is to always add an alt text. Now, what is an alt text? Basically, it is a descriptive text for if your image cannot be found. So technically, we can write in here mask. By adding alt text, you make it also easier for accessibility readers to read out what this image is to people who are unable to see. A very important attribute that you will use throughout your front-end development career is the style attribute. So now the style attribute allows you to actually style the HTML component in a CSS format. So for instance, we can add the style attribute to our paragraph element and specify a color. You say color, colon, and then let's make this purple. Then I'm going to specify a background color too, and maybe make it black. When we save this, we can go ahead and see that we have this purple text on a black background. This is known as inline styling, and it's called that for the reason because you are basically applying the style rules on the element itself. After this HTML course, I will make a CSS course where I will dive deep into how to style with CSS. There are many ways, and inline styling is one of them. This is a little bit of a glimpse. Great, so let's move on with HTML. Now, another attribute that is pure to the HTML tag here at the top is the lang attribute. You can specify what language this website is, and it helps for optimization on search engines to find your site and recommend it to users. So we are specifying our website as being English. You can also add some country codes to make it easier for the search engine optimization to actually recommend it to people in different countries. And you can just read up more about that if you would like to use that as well. I quickly want to jump back to the website that we are busy building. Now, if we click on inspect by right-clicking on the browser, we can see that there's a direct correlation about what we are doing over here. If we select the element selector, which is this little icon, and simply hover over our elements, we can easily see that there's our paragraph with our styling in it. So you can see the direct correlation of the structure that we are busy building out. This is a great tool to use when something doesn't work quite as it seems and you want to actually pinpoint what's happening to it. You can click on an element and find out where it sits in the structure. What's great about these dev tools is especially this little section over here regarding the styles. We will get more into this in our CSS course, but I promise you're going to love this part. To finish off the attribute section, there is an attribute that we can add to different elements, and it's called the title. Now, whenever you add a title to any of these elements, it creates a tooltip. So I'm just going to say tooltip, like so. And then I'm going to save it, go back. And then once I hover over this title and leave my mouse on it, you can see the tooltip pop up. This is also to do with accessibility, so feel free to add it if you like to. I'm going to personally remove the tooltip. Then there is the element that we discussed, which is the line break, which is defined by writing BR. And remember, this doesn't have an opening and a closing tag, it simply combines them in one. Now adding a few of these will create some line breaks in the code. So when we look at it, you can see this space. But that being said, you also get the one where it's HR. If you put this, then you'll get a line, like so. Usually these days, these two elements are not really used as much, seeing that you can achieve similar results with styling much more effectively. we are going to take a look at the few styling elements we get when it comes to text formatting. Now these elements can be wrapped around text and it achieves different results. For example, let's wrap this sentence in a B tag. This means we will try and make this text bold. So you can do this, opening B and closing B. Now if I save this, go back to my website, I can see that this sentence over here is now in bold. We can achieve this same result by writing strong. When doing this, we are telling the text that this is important text. So if we go back, you can see that the results are kind of the same. We have a lot of options and let me show you them. I've gone ahead and added some of the text formatting tags like sub, sup, as well as italic and mark. Now I'll show you the results of them all. Just know that each one has an opening and a closing tag and it wraps the text. When we look at the results, we can see our sub and sub text formatting over there, italic, as well as mark. Now this is easy for us to achieve and it doesn't take any styling, and this is generally used in markup languages where you get editors online. Pretty cool. Now you can go ahead and play around with this. Currently our page looks very ugly and we will fix this all in our CSS course. But for now, let's carry on and see what more HTML has to offer. I want to stop for a second and personally congratulate you for making it this far. You can now write basic HTML with the few elements that I've shown you. We are not done yet, so let's take a look at comments. To write a comment, what you do is place syntax like this. You put your arrow, exclamation mark, and 2 dashes as the start, and then for ending it off, you put 2 dashes and an arrow again. This time, everything in between here, so the stuff going in here, will not be shown on the page. I can save it and it will not render at all. This means anything that we wrap with this syntax, so let's wrap this P tag like so, and we need to remember to end it off. Once we've done this, this whole paragraph is commented out too. If we now save this page and go back to our website, we can see our paragraph is gone. I also want to take a time to mention something. If we mention any text here, I'm going to type out a bunch of characters and it's not being wrapped in any element, and I save this, this will still show up on the page. This is just very bad because it has no semantic meaning to the browser. It doesn't know in which element it is wrapped in, but technically it will still display. This is a very bad practice, so always wrap your content in the respective elements. I'm going to unwrap this P tag now by removing the comments and leaving this comment over here. I'll just change this to say this is a comment, just so that you also can see that. Let's for a moment jump back to the image tag. Now this element is quite special because it doesn't only need to take in PNGs, it can also take in various amounts of formats such as JPEGs, GIFs, and so on. I'm going to add another image, this time below the last paragraph. I'm going to specify my image tag, and remember, image tag does not have a closing tag, but it closes in on itself. Then I'm going to create an alt tag or an attribute basically to specify what this is. I'm going to say this is my GIF. We can probably get a more descriptive meaning, but for now that's fine. Then the source, and here I want you to see what the difference is. Over here on the source, we're pointing to an external source on a website. This time I've uploaded a personal GIF to my file structure, which looks like this. So I'm going to go back to my HTML file and then in the source specify that this is sitting in the same directory as mygif.gif. Then I'm going to give it a width as well. This time 200 would be fine. I'm going to save this and let's go and check it out. And there's our GIF image. It looks beautiful. Now you notice that the link is now displaying on the right hand side of this GIF. You might find it strange because all the elements that we've placed in pops in below each other. Well, keep this in mind. Images are displayed as inline. And what does that even mean? Well, in HTML, each element has a way of displaying on the page. If there's no CSS applied by default, some elements display as block, meaning that it takes the full available space from left to right, and some elements are displayed as inline. The reason why this title does not sit next to our mask image is because title is a block element. The image and a link are both inline, and that's why they try and fit next to each other. We can find out what the default display is of an element by opening the developer tools, clicking on the element selector, and selecting any element. Here I've selected the paragraph. If we go here to computed and we scroll down, we can see that its display type is block. So like I said, when an element displays as block, it means it's going to try and take up the full available width of the screen. When an element is inline, it will actually only take the available space that it needs, and if there's another inline element next to it, that inline will pop in next to it. And it's quite confusing to kind of explain this, but you can see this happening with the link as well as the image. If we select the image over here, we can see that the display type by default is inline, as well as this image below, this GIF. So if we click on that one, it's inline. And if we select this link, we can see that it's also inline. That's why these two are sitting next to each other. Now it's quite confusing why it works like this. I prefer everything being displayed as block, and then with CSS we change it, but just know that some elements by default displays as inline and some display as block. This doesn't hinder us from changing how we want it to display because we can change this with CSS. But like I said, that's for the next course. Let's focus on continuing our HTML journey. Next, you will see that I have imported a favicon. Now, a favicon is basically something that displays at the top bar of your tabs when opening a website. It looks much like this, where the star is this icon on your browser. Now, we have our favicon here, but how do we tell the HTML page to use it? Well, we can create a link. Now, we're going to create a link, and this is going to be inside of the header or the head. And basically, remember, like I said, this is like the brains of your operation, right? So we're going to specify this time it's going to be icon. We're going to give it an attribute that is the type. And the type that we're going to specify is the image / X icon, like so. Then this link also needs an href. This href, we're going to point it to our directory, and it's sitting on the top level. So we can basically specify a // meaning that we are looking in the current directory for the favicon image. Just a little bit of directory path management. Let's say, for instance, this favicon actually sat inside a folder called images. If this were to be the case and I placed it in there, we would have to update this path to be in the images folder / favicon, like so. I think this is way better, so let's go and move our GIF in there as well. And then we can just go back, and then we need to update our GIF over here as well, like so. This is how directory paths work, but the dot is sometimes confusing. The dot simply specifies which directory you are in currently. If, for instance, we had a new folder and I called it HTML, which is rarely the case with the index file, this is usually sitting on the top level. But let's say that was the case and I moved it inside here. This means that I cannot reference from the current directory in HTML the images, because we have to go one directory back. So how you would specify it is by placing the current directory, then 2 dots, / indicating that we are going from the current directory. 2 dots means go back, and then go into images and favicon. That's just an example, but I'm not going to do that because we want to keep our HTML file on the top level. So I can remove this, as well as my path. Now you know how to work with paths, as well as have a favicon show up on the browser tab. I want to take a look at lists next. So I'm going to copy this h2 title and put another title there. I just want to save and show you something. Remember what we said with block elements. Title, which is an h2, is a block element. That's why it will be below this link and the image. So the reason why I placed another title is because I want to focus on lists. Now, lists can be used very intuitively with HTML. What I'm about to show is not the only way you can do this. You can add images to lists, tables to lists. You can basically add anything you like to. But there's two kind of lists that's very popular, and it's called the unordered list as well as the ordered list. Let me show you the two differences. First of all, we get the unordered list, which you have to specify basically 2 tags, opening and closing, like always. It says UL. This is shorthand for unordered list, but with a list you actually need some list items. The UL simply just specifies what type of list this is going to be. So we can specify LI, meaning list item. So in here I can write NFT, and then let's add another list item and call it blockchain, like so. Now if I save this and I go back to the browser, I will be able to see an unordered list indicated by these dots. We can achieve the similar results by copying this, pasting it over here, and maybe make it a ordered list. So OL, small letters OL, and at the bottom as well, OL. If I save this and go back, you can see that we have now NFT blockchain and NFT blockchain, but this one is an ordered list and this is an unordered list. And that's the basic difference. You can use lists for a lot of things, obviously listing out elements on your page, but it's up to you to use your creativity where to use these kind of lists in HTML. They don't look pretty, but that's what CSS is for, where we will style them on a later stage. What I want us to look at next are identifiers. Now, any element in HTML, you can put one of these on. You can either provide an ID, which gives an identity to an element and specifies exactly where that element is. These IDs are very important to query them with code via JavaScript or to use them as selectors with CSS. Now, I said we're going to do CSS later, but I do want to show you the ID concept as well as the class concept. I'm going to add an ID to this list element down here. Now, I'm going to specify this ID is my NFT, and let's go and put a class on this. This is going to be my NFT. Maybe we say this is NFT group. The reason why I specified the ID as NFT purely and the class as group is because you can only have one ID that is unique for an element. But when it comes to classes, I can add a bunch of these classes on different elements like so. Then I can use them as selectors either via JavaScript, like I said, to indicate where these items are, maybe attach some click handlers, whatever we want to do. Usually classes are used for styling purposes as well, but you can use IDs too. I'm going to give a simple reference on how styling is achieved. Now there's 3 different ways of doing styles, which we'll get to, but for now I just want to type this out so that you can see how we can make use of this. So I'm going to create a style element here in the head section. Now what I can do is actually write some CSS. We can additionally, in the styles element, add an attribute which is called type. This time we're going to say this is going to be our text, and it specify that this is CSS. Now let's go and write some CSS right in here. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. And the cascading means that whatever is the most top style, will be overwritten by the most bottom one. I'm not going to dive into that too much because that will be a topic for us later. But let's go and identify this list element by its ID. When you specify and look for IDs throughout an HTML file, how you do that is by specifying a hashtag and then let's write NFT. Now we are basically saying grab this element and give it some styles. I'm going to give this list element a background color of maybe coral. Now if I save this and go to the web page, we can see indeed the background element of this list item, or this list item in particular, has a coral background. You can also see that this is kind of displaying block because it stretches all the way. Now let's go ahead and give the rest of them a different color by specifying the class that's attached to the rest of the elements. What I mean by that, remember we've specified an ID to selectively select one element, but a class can be applied to multiple elements at once. So now if we specify that we want the class, we have to specify it with a period. So we're going to type in period NFT group, like so. Now if we give this a background color and we make this whatever this is, cornflower blue, we're going to save it, go back, and we can see that the rest of the elements who has that class basically contains this style too, a background color. And now I hope you know the difference between whether you specify an ID to any of these elements and a class. So you can use them for styling, and like I said, IDs are also very helpful when you need to select a particular element. That being said, let's go ahead and learn about tables. Tables are sometimes important to use because you sometimes need structured data. A table structure looks complex, but don't worry about it too much. I'm going to go ahead and put another title below our list, just so that we can separate this out. To create a table, you need to specify the word table. Quite convenient. A table contains an opening and a closing tag, so remember to put those in. Then we need to put in our thinking caps. Tables usually consist of rows and columns. So how would we start by specifying the rows? Well, we can create a new row by specifying tr, open and close that tag. The TR stands for table row, and now we can add some kind of data inside of it. You can either add a table data or a table header. I'm going to start off by adding a TH, which is a table header. Now in here, I'm going to say these are my NFTs as a header. Let's put another one and call this blockchain as well. Or maybe we'll call this chain, because we can probably do something interesting with this, right? So NFTs and chain. Now, what we need to do is for our data, we can specify another row and then the data. But let me save this at this point because this is confusing to some people. Here at the very bottom, you will see NFTs and chain. Keep in mind, these are not two words next to each other, but in fact, this is a table, and each one of these NFT and chain, they live in their own cells, much like Excel. We can go back and then extend on this by adding another TR, which is a table row. Please remember to use lowercase for all your elements, like so. Table row. Then we need TD, which is a table data. Now I'm going to enter in the first one, keeping in mind that we can maybe say this is a punk, and then we're going to add another piece of data. This is on the Ethereum network. And let's do this again. This time I'm going to say Kitty. and this one is maybe on polygon. I'm going to save this and go back. And now we can see that we've got our NFTs and our chains, and then there's Punk and ETH, Kitty and Polygon. And that is basically how tables work. And if you construct something in a table, it's very nice to go ahead then and style it. So maybe you see lines between the table sections or cells, and there's a lot more that we can do. I will leave this table in here so that we can go ahead and style it on a later stage. HTML is a wonderful language, but it's very static. Sometimes we want a bit more dynamicness inside of our page. That's why JavaScript is there. Now we can basically specify a script tag just before the body ends, like so. Open a script tag and close it as well. Then I'm just going to quickly show you, and this will cover fully in our JavaScript course, but I'm going to show you how we can actually select this ID and then change the value from NFT to something else. What you can do with the JavaScript is make use of a selector. So we're going to select that ID by looking at the document. Now the document refers to this whole page, and this is actually an object that lives on the browser. It's hard for me to explain what the document is without showing you. So I'm going to console, and when we say console.log, we basically want to print out in the console something that we specify in these brackets. I'm going to console.log the document. Once I save this, go back to my web page and open the DevTools by right-clicking Inspect and clicking on the console tab over here, we can see that we actually get the whole document printed out. What does this mean for us? Well, we can basically go and now say, let's take the whole document. So let's type out document.getElementById. This is a function given to us to select or query select basically our ID field that we want to specify, which is in our case, the NFT. However, you just specify NFT like this, not with a hashtag like you do when you type out CSS. So down here, you're going to specify it without the hashtag. Then we actually can do some interesting things. But for now, I'm going to take this whole thing, cut it out, and console.log it again. This time for you to see what did it select. If we go back now to our page, we can see that the console is now printing out this li element with a hashtag NFT. It has selected this, and this is pretty cool. If we open it, you can see a bunch of different things that we can now do with it. One of it is the inner HTML that we can actually change. So let's go ahead and go to our file and complete our function. So I'm going to take out the log because we won't need it again. This time I'm going to say change the inner HTML. Now, like I said, we are going to cover this in JavaScript, but let's change this to simply say my NFT, like so. Let's end this off with a semicolon and then take a look at what's going to happen. On the start of this page, this line is going to kick off. It's going to find the ID, the element, list item over there, and then it's going to change the inner HTML, the actual text, to my NFT instead of NFT. So if we save this and go back to the browser, we can actually close the developer tools, but we can see that this list item now says my NFT instead of just NFT. That is the beauty of dynamicness with HTML and JavaScript. So this is something you can do, and I just wanted to show you because it's part of HTML, that script tag, but there are numerous ways of importing JavaScript into your HTML and making use of it. JavaScript is great for making pages dynamic. But now it's time for us to look at another element in HTML. I'm going to paste another title h2. This is just for me to separate the content that we're busy with. And then I'm going to type in iframe like so. Open and close the tags. An iframe is a very unique element in HTML which helps facilitate showing other web pages inside of our web page. It's almost like Inception. Let me show you how it works. You specify the iframe syntax like so with an opening and a closing, and then you give it a source. I'm going to go ahead and select our website as the source that I want to display in our website over here. Now let's go ahead and implement this. So in the iframe, in the source field, I'm going to put the URI that I want to be displayed. Then I'm going to simply give it a width and a height. So I'm going to say this width is maybe 400 pixels and the height is going to be 300. Let's save this and go back to our web page. Here you can see is a mini little site of the HashLips website. That's pretty cool. Now it's small because I specified it only to be 400. But what I can technically do is go back and specify this as being 100%. This will take up the 100% of the page, and that looks a bit better. There are numerous reasons for why someone would like to incorporate an iframe of another website into theirs. It does come with limitations. For instance, you can't style anything on this particular page because it doesn't belong to you, or even if it does, that simply can't work with an iframe because you are simply showing the other page and not actually having access to the underlying content. That being said, there might be some reasons why you would like to use it. Iframes are cool, but we also need to take a look at how do we consume data or actually have users input data into our website. I'm going to create another title field, and this time I'm going to be creating a form. Forms are a great way of submitting data to the backend or just collecting user input in general. How you start off with it is by specifying the actual form like so. This contains an opening as well as a closing tag, and the reason for that is because your entire form will consist inside these two tags. The reason for this is because at the very top, the form has an attribute called action. Now the action attribute is very special. It basically says what needs to happen once we click on this form and submit it. We will get to the submit part just now. Just know that we will fill this action part in after we are done with our form. Forms consist mainly of inputs and labels. The whole purpose of a form is to collect data, so at some point we need to submit it, and when we do, the form data will be sent to the relevant party that we specify. It's up to that party to work with the data as it sees fit. All we care about is actually specifying and writing out a form. Let's go ahead and specify the first input of our form. You can use the input element and it has a self-closing tag like so. An input can be many things. It can range from being a text, a button, and so on. So we need to specify a type for an input. I'm going to say this type is going to be of type text. Now that I have my type, it will recognize that it's a type of text, and I can just save this, go back to my website and check it out. There we get our type input of text, so we can just basically type in anything we want to. Along with an input field, you can give it a name field as well. This time I'm going to specify this as the NFT name input. When we do this, the form immediately recognizes this as the NFT name. You can also specify an ID, which can be later used to use as styling as well. You can call this the same as the name field. Now let's go ahead and create a label element, which has an opening and closing as well. And this we can specify to say to the users, type in the NFT name over here. What's nice about it, if error handling later comes along, what you can do is also specify another attribute, which is the for attribute. We can specify that this label is for the NFT name input over here. And that is pretty cool. We can go ahead and save this, go back to our browser and see that we now have the name as well as the input. That is great, but let's actually add a line break. So BR over there, and what this will create, seeing that this is an inline element, the label, this will actually make them cascade and be on top of each other. So if we go back, there we can see the labels above the input. We can now go ahead and duplicate this and paste it down here. This time we can maybe say that we also need the NFT chain, and a user needs to maybe specify the chain for us. So let's change this to chain as well as the name, and over here. Now we've got two input fields. Let's say that this wasn't the chain, but we wanted to upload a file. We could actually make this type of file so that when we go back to our website, you can see that we can actually choose a file to upload. This is just an example, but I want to keep it to the text because we don't want to upload any files. We will also need to specify a line break after each of these inputs because they are inline as well. The reason for that is so that we can have our label and inputs show up below each other. Once we are happy with our form, we can go ahead and input or add another input. This time we're going to specify the type as submit. When we do that and we give the value submit, I'm just going to do this like so. When we do that, we basically tell the browser that once the submit button is clicked, then it's going to send it off. So maybe we can call this value add NFT. But whatever the name is, that doesn't matter. The type is the most important part. When this kicks off, it's going to send all of this form data to some place. Now that quote unquote place can be anything. We can simply send it to an existing, I'm just going to type file.php over there. But if we add another PHP file, which is a backend file that can work on a Linux server and then consume this data, maybe save the user or save the user's data to a database, whatever it might be. Or we can save it maybe in a function and work with it that way too. But that being said, this is generally how a form works. I want you to understand that forms do get more complex than this. You can add validation with JavaScript, make sure the user inputs exactly what you want them to input, and there's a lot more going on. Maybe later on we can do a full course on forms and how to work with them in detail. But this is the basics, and I'm sure you'll come right by just using this as is for now. The last element that I would like to discuss is my favorite element called the div. Now you will see a div being used a lot in development, and the reason for that is because it's a structural container kind of element. It's a special element that's used to group things together, and the reason why you want to group certain elements together is to position them differently, style them together, and work with it in a nice layout fashion. Keep in mind there are semantic ways of using HTML, for instance specifying sections, navbars, main, summaries, and all those kind of nice elements, but I'll give you great resources to go and read up further on those. But a div element is the simplest way of grouping things together, especially when it comes to layout. Let's take the scenario. I want to style this title along with this paragraph and all of these line breaks. I can simply go and wrap them all in a div element. So the starting tag goes there, and then the ending one over here. You can immediately see that an indentation takes place because all this content is now wrapped inside of this div. I can now go ahead and add a style if I want to, maybe change the whole background color to this dark blue. Let me go and check this out. So now if we go a bit more up, there we can see everything from our title all the way down to this big paragraph was now colored with a blue background. These background examples are very simple, But when we get to CSS, we're going to really see the power of a div. And that is it, everyone. I really hoped you enjoyed my HTML basics course. With this knowledge, you will be able to go out and structure your pages in HTML. I highly recommend to watch my following course on CSS, where I'm going to teach you how to style what you've learned in HTML. It's going to be amazing, and we are going to be taking this page that we've created that looks super ugly at this stage and turn it into a work of art. Now, if you're interested in that, go ahead and go and follow me on this channel. Also, give me a thumbs up if you really enjoyed my content and leave a comment because I always read it. Maybe let me know in the comments what you would like to see next. Lastly, if you struggled with any of the code and you want to know more, go to our webpage hashlips.online or join the Discord channel. I want to leave you with some great resources. So if you want to dive deep into HTML, go to the developer.mozilla.org documentation. You can read all up about HTML. The other great resource to follow along with are the W3 Schools webpage, where you can do the full course on HTML. Lastly, I want to thank the 20,000 subscribers to my channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and turn on that bell notification icon for my latest updates. Till the next video, guys, I wish you good luck in the HTML journey, and I'll see you in the CSS video.